The ballroom fell silent before Lady Seraphine Vale spoke a single word. Hundreds of candles burned beneath the crystal chandeliers of Blackmere Hall. Their golden light shimmered across polished marble floors, jeweled gowns, military uniforms, and the astonished faces of northern England's most influential families. Outside, snow drifted across the cliffs overlooking the sea. Inside, an entirely different storm had begun. Aurielle Whitford stood near the center of the ballroom, unable to move. Only days ago she had carried silver trays through these same rooms while noble guests looked past her as though she were part of the furniture. Tonight every eye in Blackmere Hall was fixed upon her. Some stared with curiosity. Others with disbelief. A few with unmistakable fear. Lady Seraphine stepped forward into the center of the gathering. Her dark gown seemed almost severe beneath the chandelier light. The room waited. No one interrupted her. No one dared. The missing Ashbourne heir survived. The word shattered the silence like breaking glass. A collective breath swept through the ballroom. Conversations died instantly. Several older nobles exchanged startled looks. Others began whispering before they could stop themselves. Aurielle felt her pulse hammering against her ribs. Beside her, Mrs. Holomere stood unusually rigid. The housekeeper's face remained composed, but her hands tightened around each other with enough force to whiten her knuckles. At the far end of the room, Lucien Ravenshire remained perfectly still. His expression revealed nothing. Yet somehow his silence felt more powerful than any speech. Seraphine's gaze settled upon Aurielle. For 18 years, she continued calmly, England believed the Ashbourne line had ended in fire. More murmurs followed. Several guests glanced toward one another uneasily. The Ashbourne tragedy had become one of those stories whispered across drawing rooms for nearly 2 decades. A vanished family. A burned estate. A lost child. A mystery buried beneath time and convenience. That belief was false. Aurielle felt the weight of hundreds of eyes settle more heavily upon her shoulders. She wanted to retreat. She wanted to disappear back into the servants' corridors where nobody expected anything from her. But that life had already begun slipping away. There would be no returning to it now. A London barrister stepped forward from the crowd. He carried a leather portfolio tucked beneath one arm. His silver spectacles reflected the ballroom light as he cleared his throat. Lady Seraphine's statement has prompted an official inquiry into the Ashbourne succession. His voice carried easily across the room. No final legal determination has been made. That small qualification changed everything. The crowd sensed it immediately. Hope. Doubt. Opportunity. Nobles understood inheritance better than most people understood weather. Estates rose and fell because of a single signature. Fortunes changed because of a forgotten document. A claim was not ownership. Not yet. Aurielle saw several expressions shift instantly. Calculations began behind polite smiles. Lucien finally moved. He crossed the ballroom floor with calm, deliberate steps until he stood beside her. The simple gesture changed the atmosphere immediately. No one could mistake its meaning. The Duke of Blackmere was standing beside the girl who had served drinks at his winter assembly only days earlier. Support. Protection. Recognition. The whispers grew louder. Aurielle kept her gaze forward. You do not have to face them alone, Lucien said quietly enough that only she could hear. She swallowed carefully. It feels as though the entire room is staring. His eyes remained on the crowd. They are. Despite everything, a faint smile threatened the corner of her mouth. Then another voice interrupted. With good reason. The words cut sharply through the ballroom. A tall gentleman rose from his chair near the eastern fireplace. He appeared to be in his early 60s, broad-shouldered despite his age, with silver hair and the confident posture of a man accustomed to being heard. Lord Pembroke. One of the most influential landowners in northern England. Silence returned almost immediately. He stepped forward slowly. This announcement raises serious questions. Seraphine watched him without expression. Such as whether this young woman is truly who you claim she is. The ballroom tightened once again. Aurielle felt every heartbeat, every breath, every second. Lord Pembroke looked directly at her. Not cruelly, not kindly, simply critically. An extraordinary claim requires extraordinary proof. The London barrister nodded slightly. That is legally correct. Murmur spread through the room again. Lucien's expression cooled several degrees. The evidence exists. Perhaps, Lord Pembroke replied. But evidence can be interpreted. Another nobleman stood. Then another. Questions emerged from every corner of the ballroom. What documents survived? Who verified them? Why had the girl remained hidden so long? Why reveal the truth now? The noise grew steadily. Aurielle felt herself standing at the center of a storm she barely understood. Then something unexpected happened. She became angry. Not frightened. Angry. The emotion surprised her. For 18 years other people had decided everything about her life. They had hidden truths from her. Protected her. Manipulated her. Lied to her. Argued over her existence as though she were a document instead of a person. And now strangers debated whether she was real while standing only feet away. Her hand slowly unclenched. The ballroom continued arguing around her. Lucien noticed the change first. His gaze shifted briefly toward her face. Something in his expression sharpened. Recognition, perhaps. Then Lord Pembroke spoke again. Until proper verification occurs, no reasonable person can simply accept this announcement. Aurielle lifted her chin. The movement was small. Yet it drew attention immediately. Several nearby guests fell silent. She could feel their eyes upon her again. This time she did not look away. You are right. Her voice carried farther than she expected. The ballroom quieted. Lord Pembroke blinked once. Apparently he had not expected agreement. Aurielle drew a slow breath. You should not accept it simply because someone announces it. Complete silence now. Even the musicians had stopped. I would not. She looked around the ballroom carefully. Not if our positions were reversed. More silence followed. Aurielle felt strangely calm. The fear remained somewhere beneath the surface, but another part of her had begun emerging. The part that was tired of being hidden. I do not know every answer yet, she continued. I spent most of my life believing I was someone else. Several guests exchanged surprised looks. Honesty had not been what they expected either. I am learning the truth at the same time many of you are. The London barrister watched her closely. Lord Pembroke remained silent. Aurielle continued anyway. But whether I am Aurelia Ashbourne or not, the facts deserve to be examined honestly. A long pause followed. Then an older countess near the western wall nodded once. Small. Almost imperceptible. Yet others noticed. The atmosphere shifted again. Not acceptance. Not yet. Respect, perhaps. Lord Pembroke studied her for several moments before speaking. A sensible answer. The tension eased slightly. Not completely. Never completely. But enough. Lucien's voice came quietly beside her. Well done. She kept her eyes forward. I nearly fainted. A brief flicker of amusement touched his features. Gone almost immediately. Yet real. Before either could speak again, the main doors of the ballroom opened. Every head turned. A servant hurried inside carrying a sealed leather dispatch case. Snow clung to his coat. His breathing suggested he had crossed the estate grounds at considerable speed. He approached the London barrister directly and handed over the case. Unease moved through the room. The barrister frowned as he examined the seal. Then he opened the case. Silence deepened. His expression changed. Not dramatically. Just enough. Lucien noticed immediately. So did Seraphine. "What is it?" Seraphine asked. The barrister looked up slowly. "Additional succession records." Lord Pembroke folded his arms. "Relevant. Potentially very relevant." The room seemed to stop breathing. The barrister removed several aged documents and examined them beneath the chandelier light. His frown deepened. Then he looked directly toward Aurielle. For the first time that evening, genuine uncertainty appeared in his eyes. These records suggest another surviving claimant may exist. The ballroom erupted. Gasps. Whispers. Shocked voices. Questions from every direction. Aurielle felt the floor disappear beneath her. Another claimant. Another heir. Another person connected to Ashbourne. She looked toward Lucien instinctively. His face had become unreadable. Dangerous. Controlled. The expression of a man who had just realized the battle ahead would be far worse than expected. Across the ballroom, Seraphine closed her eyes briefly. As though this was the one possibility she had hoped would never arrive. The London barrister slowly lowered the documents. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said carefully, "it appears the Ashbourne matter is far from settled." And for the first time since learning her true name, Aurielle understood that reclaiming her identity might be only the beginning of the war. The ballroom never truly recovered from the shock. Even after the first wave of whispers subsided, the atmosphere remained charged with uncertainty. Noblemen who had spent years negotiating trade agreements now spoke in hushed voices beside marble columns. Ladies who normally discussed marriages and social invitations exchanged anxious glances instead. The name Ashbourne drifted through Blackmere Hall like a ghost that had suddenly remembered it was still alive. Aurielle stood near one of the tall windows overlooking the snow-covered cliffs. The sea beyond appeared almost black beneath the winter sky. She welcomed the distance. It gave her something stable to focus on while the world shifted beneath her feet once again. Another claimant. The words refused to leave her mind. Only hours ago she had been struggling to accept the possibility that she was Aurelia Ashbourne. Now someone else might possess the same claim. Or perhaps a stronger one. A servant approached quietly carrying a silver tray with tea. Aurielle accepted a cup automatically before realizing her hands were cold enough to make the porcelain tremble. "You should sit down." Lucien's voice came from beside her. She had not heard him approach. She looked up. The Duke's expression remained calm, but there was tension beneath the surface. She recognized it now. The same look he wore whenever a new piece of the mystery appeared. "I am afraid if I sit down, I may never stand up again," she admitted. A faint shadow of amusement crossed his face. A reasonable concern. She glanced toward the crowd. The London barrister remained surrounded by guests demanding information. Seraphine stood several feet away speaking quietly with Lord Pembroke. Neither appeared pleased. "Do you believe the records?" Aurielle asked. Lucien considered the question carefully. "I believe someone wanted them delivered tonight." "That is not the same thing." "No." His grey eyes moved toward the barrister. "It is not." Silence settled between them for several moments. The ballroom noise felt distant now. Muted. Almost unreal. Aurielle lowered her gaze to the teacup in her hands. Part of me was relieved. Lucien looked toward her. "Relieved?" "When they announced I might be Aurelia." She laughed softly without humor. At least there was an answer. The confession surprised even her. For the first time, my life made sense. Lucien remained silent. She continued anyway. "Now everything feels uncertain again." "Not everything." She glanced up. "No. You existed before tonight." His voice remained steady. "You existed before Ashbourne. Before succession claims. Before titles." Aurielle stared at him. The simplicity of the statement struck her unexpectedly hard. Around them, noble families debated inheritance, estates, wealth, alliances. Yet Lucien had reduced everything to something much smaller and somehow far more important. She existed. The realization eased a small part of the fear she had been carrying all evening. "Thank you," she said quietly. His gaze held hers for a brief moment before shifting away. Neither of them seemed eager to examine that moment too closely. A sudden disturbance near the center of the ballroom drew attention. The London barrister had climbed onto a small platform normally reserved for musicians during formal assemblies. Conversations gradually faded. The crowd turned toward him once more. "Ladies and gentlemen." His voice carried clearly through the room. "I ask for your patience." Silence followed. The barrister held several documents in one hand. The records delivered tonight originated from a private archive recently discovered in York. Curious murmurs spread immediately. Their authenticity has not yet been verified. Lord Pembroke folded his arms. "And the claimant?" The barrister nodded. "The documents reference a second surviving descendant connected to House Ashbourne." The ballroom tightened once again. Aurielle felt her pulse quicken. Lucien's expression did not change, but she noticed the slight narrowing of his eyes. The Duke was listening very carefully now. "Who is this claimant?" someone called from the crowd. The barrister hesitated. That hesitation proved more revealing than any answer. The records do not provide a complete identity. Confusion followed immediately. "Then what do they provide?" another guest demanded. The barrister looked down at the documents. A birth reference. Silence. A guardianship transfer. More silence. And one surviving family name. Aurielle felt every nerve in her body tighten. The barrister slowly lifted his gaze. "Blackthorn." The reaction was immediate. Several guests exchanged bewildered looks. Others frowned in concentration. The name meant nothing to Aurielle. Yet the effect on Lucien was unmistakable. His jaw tightened slightly. Across the ballroom, Seraphine went completely still. Lord Pembroke noticed it too. "You recognize the name," he said. Seraphine did not answer immediately. Many families recognize that name. The response sounded carefully measured. Too carefully measured. The barrister continued. "The records indicate a possible connection between the Blackthorn family and the Ashbourne succession." Aurielle looked toward Lucien. "Who are they?" she whispered. "A minor noble house." His voice remained low. "Or they were." "Were." The family disappeared from society years ago. Unease settled inside her chest. Another vanished family. Another hidden history. Another thread connecting itself to the mystery. The crowd erupted into fresh speculation. The barrister attempted to restore order. It was not entirely successful. Questions came from every direction. Theories followed. Rumors expanded instantly. The uncertainty seemed to feed itself. Then a woman near the eastern wall spoke loudly enough for half the ballroom to hear. Convenient timing. Silence spread outward from her words. She was elderly. Elegant. Sharply intelligent. The Dowager Countess of Northbridge. One of the most respected women in the county. "What do you mean?" Lord Pembroke asked. The Countess looked toward the barrister. "A missing heir appears after 18 years. She gestured toward Aurielle. "Then another heir appears the same evening." Her gaze sharpened. "Somebody wishes to create confusion." The statement landed heavily. Because it made sense. Too much sense. Lucien's attention remained fixed on the documents. "Perhaps," he said quietly. The Countess turned toward him. "You disagree?" "No." His expression darkened slightly. "I believe you may be correct." The ballroom fell silent once more. The Duke of Blackmere rarely offered opinions casually. When he spoke, people listened. Then someone sent those records deliberately, Lord Pembroke said. Yes. To challenge the Ashbourne claim. Possibly. Aurielle felt cold move through her chest. Not because of the accusation. Because of the implication. Someone was already acting. Already maneuvering. Already preparing for a battle she barely understood. Lucien looked toward her. For one brief moment the crowd disappeared. The ballroom disappeared. Everything disappeared except the certainty in his eyes. This is not over, she said quietly. No. His answer came immediately. It is only beginning. Before she could respond, another servant hurried into the ballroom. Snow clung to his boots. His face appeared pale beneath the candlelight. He crossed directly toward the London barrister and whispered something into his ear. The barrister's expression changed instantly. Aurielle saw it happen. Surprise first. Then concern. Then something much closer to alarm. The room sensed it as well. Silence spread rapidly. What is it? Lord Pembroke demanded. The barrister looked up slowly. A carriage has arrived from York. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The barrister swallowed carefully. The passengers claimed to represent House Blackthorne. The ballroom seemed to stop breathing. Outside, beyond the towering windows of Blackmere Hall, snow continued falling across the cliffs and the dark winter sea. Inside, an entirely new chapter of the Ashbourne mystery had just arrived at the front gates. No one left the ballroom. That alone revealed how extraordinary the situation had become. In most noble houses, guests would have retired hours earlier. The older gentlemen would have sought brandy beside library fires. The ladies would have withdrawn to private parlors. Instead, nearly every guest remained exactly where they were, held captive by curiosity stronger than etiquette. Outside, the storm intensified. Snow pressed against the tall windows of Blackmere Hall. Wind swept across the cliffs overlooking the sea. Inside, hundreds of candles continued burning beneath crystal chandeliers while servants quietly replenished tea and coffee that no one seemed interested in drinking. Aurielle stood near the staircase landing overlooking the ballroom floor. From there she could see nearly everyone. The London barrister remained engaged in urgent conversation with Lord Pembroke. Seraphine stood alone near the western fireplace. Lucien had disappeared several minutes earlier after receiving word that the Blackthorne representatives had arrived. The absence unsettled her more than she expected. She told herself it was because he understood this mystery better than anyone else. That explanation sounded reasonable. It was also incomplete. The truth was harder to admit. Since entering Blackmere Hall, Lucien Ravenshaw had become the one constant presence inside a world that changed every hour. The realization made her uncomfortable. She looked away from the ballroom and toward the snow-covered windows. A movement below caught her attention. The front courtyard remained visible through the glass. Several lanterns glowed near the main entrance. Dark figures crossed the snow. Among them stood Lucien. Even from this distance, his posture was unmistakable. Tall. Controlled. Unmoving. Opposite him stood two strangers. One appeared elderly. The other significantly younger. Aurielle could not make out their faces. Only silhouettes beneath the winter darkness. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "You are watching him." Aurielle turned. Seraphine stood beside her. She had approached so quietly that Aurielle had not heard a single footstep. "I was watching the courtyard," Aurielle replied carefully. Seraphine's mouth curved slightly. "Of course." The older woman followed her gaze toward the windows. Silence settled between them. Not comfortable silence. Not hostile silence. Something more complicated. Since learning fragments of the truth, Aurielle had stopped viewing Seraphine as a simple villain. The problem was that she had not yet learned what to view her as instead. "Do you know the Blackthorns?" Aurielle finally asked. Seraphine remained quiet for several seconds. I knew of them. That sounds different. It is. Her eyes remained fixed on the courtyard below. They were never important enough to attract attention. Which is why their appearance tonight concerns me. Aurielle frowned slightly. You think someone is using them? I think someone has been planning this for a very long time. The answer settled uneasily between them. Aurielle studied the older woman. Candlelight softened some of the severity in Seraphine's features. For the first time, she appeared tired. Not physically. Emotionally. As though she had spent years carrying burdens nobody else could see. You expected this, Aurielle said quietly. Seraphine's gaze shifted toward her. No. Then why do you look disappointed instead of surprised? Something flickered briefly across the woman's face. Gone almost immediately. Because every time the truth moves closer, someone finds a new way to bury it. Before Aurielle could respond, movement erupted below. The ballroom doors opened. Conversation stopped instantly. Lucien entered first. The crowd parted without being asked. Behind him came the two visitors from the carriage. The older man appeared to be nearly 70. Thin. Sharp-featured. Respectably dressed despite obvious signs of travel. Beside him walked a young woman perhaps 20 years old. She wore a dark blue cloak trimmed with silver fur. Snowflakes still clung to her sleeves. The ballroom became completely silent. The London barrister stepped forward immediately. Sir. The older gentleman removed his gloves. My name is Harold Blackthorne. His voice carried clearly through the room. And this is my granddaughter, Clara Blackthorne. Every eye turned toward the young woman. She lowered her gaze briefly before looking back up. There was intelligence in her expression. An apprehension. Aurielle recognized both emotions because she felt them herself. Harold Blackthorne continued. We arrived from York after receiving correspondence concerning House Ashbourne. The barrister nodded. You claim to possess relevant information. Yes. Lucien remained near the center of the room. His face revealed nothing. Yet Aurielle noticed he had positioned himself between the newcomers and the crowd. Instinctively protective. The observation warmed her unexpectedly. Harold reached into his coat and withdrew a leather folder. The sight immediately transformed the atmosphere. Every noble in the room understood the power of documents. A person's future could rise or fall because of a single piece of paper. The barrister accepted the folder and opened it carefully. Several minutes passed. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sounds came from the crackling fireplaces and the distant wind beyond the windows. Finally the barrister looked up. His expression was troubled. Very troubled. Lord Pembroke stepped forward. What does it say? The barrister hesitated. The records reference a guardianship arrangement. Aurielle felt her pulse quicken. Guardianship of whom? Someone asked. The barrister lowered his eyes toward the papers once more. A child connected to House Ashbourne. Whispers spread instantly. Harold Blackthorne raised one hand. My grandfather received the child temporarily after the fire. The ballroom froze. Aurielle stared at him. The room seemed to shrink around her. What child? Lord Pembroke demanded. Harold met his gaze steadily. The missing Ashbourne heir. Shock rolled through the crowd. Several guests gasped openly. Others exchanged alarmed looks. The barrister flipped through the documents again. These records indicate the child was transferred briefly into Blackthorne care before being moved elsewhere. Aurielle felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. Lucien's expression darkened. Seraphine closed her eyes briefly. Nobody looked comfortable. Nobody looked relieved. Because this information solved nothing. It only complicated everything further. Where was the child moved? Lucien asked. Harold Blackthorne turned toward him. We were never told. Silence followed. Then Clara Blackthorne spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear. That is not entirely true, grandfather. The older man looked startled. So did everyone else? Clara took a slow breath. You told me there was a name. Harold's face tightened. Clara. You did. She looked toward the barrister. Then toward Lucien. Finally toward Aurielle. Their eyes met briefly. Something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Not of identity. Of circumstance. Two young women trapped inside a story much larger than themselves. There was a name, Clara repeated. The ballroom leaned closer. Even the air seemed to wait. Harold sighed heavily. Defeated. Yes. The word barely rose above a whisper. Lucien stepped forward. What name? Harold looked directly at him. Ravensire. Silence exploded across the room. No one moved. No one breathed. Aurielle felt cold spread through her chest. Ravensire. Not Vale. Not Blackthorne. Ravensire. Every eye turned toward Lucien. The Duke stood motionless beneath the chandelier light. His face became unreadable. More unreadable than she had ever seen it. The barrister slowly lowered the documents. Lord Pembroke stared in disbelief. Even Seraphine looked shaken. Harold Blackthorne swallowed carefully. The final transfer instructions carried the Ravensire seal. The word settled like falling snow. Heavy. Unavoidable. Aurielle's heartbeat echoed inside her ears. Fragments of memory surfaced again. The fire. The carriage. The hidden years. And now another piece of the puzzle pointed directly toward Blackmere. Toward the family Lucien had spent 14 years defending. Toward the house that had become the center of every secret. She looked at Lucien. He had not moved. Had not spoken. Had not attempted to explain. For the first time since arriving at Blackmere Hall, uncertainty entered her heart where trust had begun growing. And across the ballroom, beneath the golden light of 100 candles, Lucien Ravensire finally realized that the next mystery would not threaten only the Ashbourne claim. It would threaten his own family name. The silence lasted only a few seconds. It felt much longer. Hundreds of eyes remained fixed on Lucien Ravensire as though the answer to 18 years of mystery rested entirely upon his shoulders. Candlelight flickered across the ballroom. Snow continued drifting beyond the tall windows. Somewhere deep within Blackmere Hall, a grandfather clock struck midnight. The sound echoed through the silence like a warning. Lucien finally spoke. "Show me the document." His voice remained calm. Too calm. The London barrister handed over the Blackthorne records without hesitation. The Duke studied them beneath the chandelier light while the room waited. No one interrupted him. No one dared. Aurielle watched carefully. She had spent weeks learning the small changes in his expression. The slight tightening of his jaw when something troubled him. The subtle narrowing of his eyes when a detail demanded closer examination. Now she saw both. Lucien turned another page. Then another. The silence stretched. Finally he looked up. "These records are genuine." A murmur swept through the ballroom immediately. Lord Pembroke stepped forward. "Then the Ravensire seal is authentic." Lucien met his gaze directly. "Yes." More whispers followed. Louder this time. Harder to control. Aurielle felt cold settle deeper inside her chest. She had prepared herself for many possibilities. Not this one. Not evidence connecting Blackmere directly to her disappearance. Lucien handed the documents back to the barrister. However, authenticity does not prove guilt. Lord Pembroke folded his arms. Perhaps not. His eyes sharpened. But it does raise questions. It should. The answer came immediately. The Duke's willingness to acknowledge the problem surprised several people. Aurielle noticed it. So did the others. Lucien was not defending his family blindly. He was following the evidence wherever it led. The realization should have reassured her. Instead, it complicated everything. Because part of her wanted him to have answers. Part of her wanted certainty. Yet certainty was becoming increasingly rare. Harold Blackthorne cleared his throat. The older man appeared uncomfortable beneath so much attention. There is something else. Every head turned toward him. Even Lucien. What do you mean? The barrister asked. Harold glanced toward his granddaughter before answering. The man who delivered the transfer instructions visited our estate personally. The ballroom fell silent once more. Lord Pembroke frowned. You met him. Briefly. And you remember him. Harold hesitated. Not clearly. Disappointment moved through the crowd. Then Clara Blackthorne spoke again. He remembers more than he admits. Harold closed his eyes briefly. The gesture carried the exhaustion of a man who had spent years avoiding old memories. Grandfather, Clara said softly, you told me the story many times. Harold looked toward her. For a moment neither spoke. Then the older man sighed. Very well. He turned back toward the room. I was young then. Younger than many of you imagine. A few polite smiles appeared. They vanished quickly. Harold continued. The fire had already become national news. Everyone knew about Ashbourne Manor. Everyone believed the family was gone. He swallowed carefully. Then one winter evening a carriage arrived. Aurielle felt her heartbeat quicken. Fragments of memory stirred somewhere deep inside her mind. Snow. Darkness. A carriage. The man carried official papers. Harold's gaze drifted toward the ballroom windows as though seeing another winter long ago. He said a child required temporary protection. Lucien remained perfectly still. What did he look like? Harold frowned in concentration. Tall. Not helpful. The room knew it. Harold seemed aware of that as well. Dark coat. Dark hair. Still not enough. Anything else? The barrister asked. Harold closed his eyes. Silence followed. Long enough that several guests shifted impatiently. Then something changed. The older man's expression sharpened slightly. Memory returning. There was a ring. The room became still again. Aurielle leaned forward unconsciously. Harold opened his eyes. A silver ring. Lucien's gaze narrowed. Describe it. Harold looked directly at him. A wolf. No one spoke. The word seemed to hang in the air. Heavy. Inescapable. The raven's higher crest. Aurielle felt her stomach tighten. Across the room, Seraphine's expression darkened. Lord Pembroke stared openly at Lucien now. Several guests began whispering again. This time nobody attempted to stop them. The implications had become impossible to ignore. Harold continued quietly. I remember the ring because it caught the firelight when he signed the transfer papers. Lucien's face remained unreadable. Yet Aurielle noticed his hands. One had closed into a fist before relaxing again. Did you know his name? The barrister asked. Harold shook his head. No. Relief flickered briefly through the ballroom. Then vanished. But there was another person. Silence returned instantly. Even Lucien seemed surprised. Another person? Harold nodded. A woman. Aurielle's breath caught. What woman? Lord Pembroke asked. Harold frowned again. I only saw her briefly. The memory clearly troubled him. She never entered the house. Then how do you remember her? Clara asked softly. Harold looked toward his granddaughter. Because she stayed with the carriage. His voice lowered. And because she wore black gloves. Across the ballroom, Seraphine Vale went completely still. Aurielle saw it immediately. So did Lucien. So did half the room. Black gloves. The same detail from the memories that had haunted Aurielle since entering Blackmere Hall. The same detail Seraphine herself had once been connected to. The older woman's face remained composed, but something had shifted behind her eyes. Something dangerous. Lord Pembroke noticed it. Lady Seraphine. She lifted her gaze slowly. Yes? You appear troubled. A faint smile touched her lips. It never reached her eyes. Should I not be? The answer revealed nothing. Yet somehow it revealed too much. Aurielle felt the room tightening around them. Piece by piece, old secrets were resurfacing. Not cleanly. Not neatly. Every answer seemed to create two new questions. Harold looked exhausted now. As though revisiting the past carried its own cost. Clara stepped closer to him. Protective. Gentle. Aurielle recognized the gesture immediately. Family. Loyalty. The simple comfort of knowing where one belonged. A painful ache moved through her chest. She had spent most of her life believing she possessed those things. Then she learned her identity had been borrowed. Her history hidden. Her future stolen before she was old enough to understand what any of it meant. There is one more thing, Harold said suddenly. The ballroom quieted again. Lucien looked toward him. What? The older man hesitated. Longer than before. His face had gone pale. Clara touched his arm. Grandfather. Harold swallowed carefully. The man with the raven's hire ring was not alone when he arrived. Confusion spread through the room. You already mentioned the woman, Lord Pembroke said. Not her. Harold's voice sounded distant now. Someone else. Silence. Complete silence. Harold stared toward the ballroom entrance as though another memory had finally emerged from the darkness. A witness. The word landed softly. Yet it struck harder than any accusation. Lucien stepped forward. A witness to what? Harold looked directly at him. To the fire. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Harold's hands trembled slightly. An old servant from Ashbourne Manor. The room seemed to freeze. Aurielle felt her pulse pounding in her ears. A witness. Someone who had survived. Someone who might know what happened. Someone who might finally answer the questions that had haunted every life connected to Ashbourne. Who was this servant? The barrister asked. Harold closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, genuine regret filled his expression. I do not know his full name. Disappointment swept through the room. Then Harold continued. But I know where he lived. Hope returned immediately. Lucien's voice remained steady. Where? Harold took a slow breath. A fishing village on the northern coast. Aurielle felt the world stop. Because she already knew the answer before he spoke it. Somewhere deep inside her heart, she knew. Harold looked toward her. Dunmere. The ballroom vanished. The noise vanished. Everything vanished except that single name. Her village. The place where she had grown up. The place where her adoptive mother had raised her. The place where someone connected to the fire had been hiding all along. And as the realization spread through the room, Lucien Ravenshire understood exactly what had to happen next. They would have to return to the place where Aurielle's stolen life had truly begun. Dunmere changed everything. The name lingered over the ballroom long after Harold Blackthorne spoke it. Guests who had never heard of the small fishing village suddenly treated it as the center of England. Every conversation returned to the same question. If a surviving witness had lived there, what had he known? More importantly, who had kept him hidden? Aurielle stood motionless beneath the chandelier light while memories drifted through her mind. Narrow coastal roads. Salt carried on winter wind. Small cottages facing the sea. The harbour where she had spent countless mornings watching fishing boats disappear into grey horizons. Dunmere had always felt ordinary. Safe. Now it seemed connected to every secret surrounding her life. Lucien broke the silence first. "When did you last hear of this witness?" Harold Blackthorne looked exhausted. "Years ago." "How many?" "Perhaps 6. Disappointment moved through the room immediately. 6 years was a long time. Enough time for people to move. Enough time for records to disappear. Enough time for trails to grow cold. Yet Lucien did not appear discouraged. If anything, his attention sharpened. "Who told you he lived there?" Harold hesitated. "My father." "And your father learned this how?" "The witness visited our estate twice after the transfer." A murmur swept through the ballroom. New information. Another missing piece. Harold continued. He seemed frightened. Aurielle felt cold move through her chest. Frightened. The same word appeared again and again whenever the past resurfaced. Frightened servants. Frightened mothers. Frightened children. Entire lives shaped by fear. Did he leave a name? Lucien asked. Harold shook his head. Only an initial. The Duke's expression remained calm. Which was? M. Silence followed. The answer solved nothing. Yet somehow it felt important. Aurielle noticed Seraphine watching Harold carefully. The older woman seemed to be searching her memory as well. Then Lord Pembroke cleared his throat. "This discussion can continue tomorrow." Several guests nodded immediately. The hour had grown late. Fatigue showed on nearly every face. Even curiosity had limits. The London barrister agreed. A formal review of the records should begin in the morning. The crowd slowly began dispersing. Not happily. Reluctantly. Like people forced to leave a play before the final act. Within minutes servants were escorting guests toward private chambers while footmen extinguished some of the candles. The ballroom gradually emptied. Aurielle remained where she was. Her thoughts felt tangled beyond reason. Dunmere. Ravensmire. Blackthorne. Ashbourne. Every answer seemed connected to 3 new mysteries. She did not notice Lucien approach until he stopped beside her. "You should rest." She laughed softly. "Do I look capable of resting?" His expression softened slightly. "No." For a moment neither spoke. The ballroom around them continued emptying. The noise faded. The distance between them felt unusually fragile tonight. Aurielle looked toward him. "Did you know?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Lucien understood immediately. "About Dunmere." She shook her head. "About the Ravensmire seal." Silence followed. Not defensive silence. Careful silence. "No," he said at last. She studied his face. Looking for uncertainty. Looking for hesitation. Looking for anything that suggested deception. She found none. "You believe me?" he asked quietly. Aurielle hesitated. The answer mattered. More than she wanted to admit. "I believe you believe it." Something shifted briefly in his expression. Not anger. Something closer to disappointment. Yet he nodded once. Fair enough. The honesty of the response hurt unexpectedly. Before either could continue, footsteps echoed across the marble floor. Mrs. Hollomere approached carrying a sealed envelope. The housekeeper's expression was unusually severe. "Your Grace." Lucien turned immediately. "What is it?" She handed him the letter. "This arrived from the council chamber 20 minutes ago." The moment he saw the seal, his face hardened. Aurielle noticed it instantly. So did Mrs. Holomere. What happened? She asked. Lucien broke the seal and unfolded the letter. He read silently. Once. Then again. The room seemed to grow colder. Lucien. He lowered the paper slowly. The Blackmere Council has arrived. Aurielle frowned. Council? Mrs. Holomere answered before he could. Senior estate trustees. Family advisors. Legal overseers. Her voice carried clear disapproval. People who believe they own opinions about everything. Lucien almost smiled. Almost. An accurate description. Unease settled inside Aurielle's chest. Why are they here? He met her gaze. Because the Ashbourne claim threatens Blackmere. The words landed heavily. She had known this in theory. Hearing it aloud felt different. More real. More dangerous. Lucien folded the letter carefully. They want a meeting at dawn. About me? He did not answer immediately. Which was answer enough. Aurielle looked away toward the dark windows. Snow continued falling outside. Endless. Silent. Beautiful. For the first time since arriving at Blackmere Hall, she felt truly alone. Not because she lacked allies. Because she finally understood the scale of what she represented. An inheritance dispute was not simply about money. It was about power. Land. Influence. Generations of alliances. If she truly was Aurelia Ashbourne, entire noble houses could gain or lose fortunes depending on the outcome. What will they ask? She said quietly. Lucien's jaw tightened. Whether supporting your claim remains in Blackmere's interest. The answer struck harder than she expected. Not because it surprised her. Because it confirmed her deepest fear. Interests. Alliances. Estates. Those words had shaped her life long before she understood them. She turned toward him slowly. And what if they decide it does not? Silence. Long enough to hurt. Finally Lucien spoke. Then they will ask me to withdraw support. Mrs. Holomere looked openly furious. Let them ask. The housekeeper's loyalty warmed Aurielle's heart. Yet the concern remained. Her gaze never left Lucien. Will you? Another silence followed. This one heavier than the first. Lucien looked toward the ballroom doors where the last guests were disappearing into the corridors. Then toward the snow beyond the windows. Finally back to her. No. The answer came without hesitation. Relief rushed through her so quickly it almost frightened her. She had not realized how much the answer mattered until she heard it. Lucien continued before she could speak. But my refusal has consequences. For you? For everyone. His voice remained calm. The council believes Blackmere should remain neutral until the succession investigation concludes. Aurielle understood immediately. Neutral sounded reasonable. Safe. Respectable. It was also another form of abandonment. If Lucien stepped aside now, she would stand alone against families who had spent decades protecting their interests. Mrs. Holomere folded her arms. Neutrality is a luxury people demand when they are not the ones being erased. Neither Lucien nor Aurielle disagreed. The old housekeeper glanced toward the windows. The council will not like your decision. No. Some may leave. Probably. Others may oppose you publicly. Lucien's expression remained unchanged. Almost certainly. Aurielle stared at him. You already knew all of this. Yes. And you still answered no. For a moment he seemed surprised by the question. Then something softened in his eyes. Not dramatically. Just enough. You spent 18 years paying the price for other people's decisions. His voice lowered. I do not intend to add my name to that list. The word settled quietly between them. Aurielle looked away first. Not because she wanted to. Because remaining under that gaze suddenly felt impossible. The ballroom had nearly emptied now. Only a handful of servants remained. Somewhere in the distance another clock began striking the hour. Dawn felt closer than midnight. Lucien folded the council letter and slipped it into his coat pocket. "Get some sleep if you can." Aurielle smiled faintly. "You know I will not." "Yes." The corner of his mouth moved slightly. "I do." He turned toward the exit. Then stopped. Something seemed to occur to him. One more thing. She looked up. "What?" His expression became serious again. "The council meeting is private." Unease returned immediately. Meaning? Meaning if they fail to persuade me, they may attempt something else. Aurielle's pulse quickened. Such as? Lucien's gaze shifted briefly toward the dark corridor beyond the ballroom doors. Convincing the world that supporting Aurelia Ashbourne is a mistake. Silence followed. The implication required no explanation. Character attacks. Rumors. Doubt. Social isolation. Weapons every noble family understood perfectly. Lucien met her eyes one final time. Tomorrow will be difficult. Then he walked away. Aurielle remained standing beneath the fading chandelier light long after he disappeared from view. Outside, snow continued falling across Blackmere Hall. And somewhere within the estate, powerful people were already gathering to decide whether the Duke of Blackmere would be forced to choose between his family and the woman whose life had been stolen 18 years ago. Aurielle never slept. She tried. Sometime after leaving the ballroom she returned to the chamber Blackmere Hall had assigned her weeks ago when she was still considered a servant. The room felt strangely unfamiliar now. Nothing inside it had changed. The narrow bed remained beside the window. The small wardrobe still stood against the wall. A single candle burned near the washstand. Yet everything felt different because she was different. Or perhaps she was finally becoming the person she had always been. Dawn arrived beneath a sky of iron-grey clouds. Snow covered the cliffs in smooth white layers that reflected the weak winter light. Aurielle stood at the window watching the sea when a knock sounded against her door. She expected Mrs. Hollowmere. Instead, Clara Blackthorne entered. The young woman hesitated just inside the doorway. "I hope I am not intruding." Aurielle shook her head. "Not at all." Clara smiled faintly. "I could not sleep either." The confession immediately eased some of the awkwardness. Aurielle gestured toward the chairs beside the fireplace. "Neither could I." Clara crossed the room and sat down. For several moments neither spoke. They had only met hours earlier, yet circumstances created unusual bonds. Both of them had been pulled into a mystery older than themselves. Both had spent the night watching powerful families argue over histories they never created. "You are handling this remarkably well," Clara finally said. Aurielle laughed softly. "I assure you I am not." Clara smiled. A genuine smile this time. "Then you hide it better than I would." The honesty made Aurielle like her immediately. They spoke quietly for nearly half an hour. About York. About Dunmere. About the strange experience of becoming important because of events that happened before they were born. For the first time in days, Aurielle felt almost normal. Then another knock interrupted them. Mrs. Hollowmere entered without waiting for permission. One glance at her face erased every trace of calm. "The council meeting has begun." Aurielle stood immediately. "Already? Half an hour ago." The housekeeper's expression darkened. "And it is not proceeding well." Unease settled through the room. Clara rose slowly. "What happened?" Mrs. Hollowmere folded her hands together. The gesture alone revealed her frustration. 3 senior trustees are demanding that His Grace withdraw public support for the Ashbourne claim until the investigation concludes. Aurielle looked toward the window. Somehow hearing the words aloud hurt more than she expected. Mrs. Hollowmere noticed. Do not concern yourself with them. That seems impossible. Then concern yourself less. The older woman stepped closer. Lucien Ravenshire is many things. Easily persuaded is not one of them. The statement should have reassured her. Instead it created another worry. If Lucien refused, the consequences would fall upon him. Aurielle understood that now. The council was not merely questioning an inheritance dispute. They were questioning his judgment, his leadership, his loyalty to Blackmere interests. Mrs. Hollowmere seemed to read the concern in her eyes. You are wondering whether you have become a burden. Aurielle looked away. The silence answered for her. The housekeeper's expression softened unexpectedly. Listen carefully. Her voice lowered. No one forced Lucien Ravenshire to spend 14 years searching for answers. Aurielle remained silent. No one forced him to reopen Ashbourne records. Mrs. Hollowmere continued. And no one forced him to stand beside you in that ballroom. The word settled heavily inside her chest. Before she could respond, hurried footsteps echoed from the corridor. A young footman appeared moments later. Breathless. Mrs. Hollowmere. What is it? His Grace requests access to the East Tower archives immediately. The housekeeper frowned. The observatory? Yes. Something changed in her expression. Concern. Real concern. Tell him I am coming. The footman disappeared almost immediately. Aurielle exchanged a glance with Clara. Both sensed it. Something important had happened. Mrs. Hollowmere turned toward the door. Then stopped. Stay here. Aurielle blinked. Why? The older woman hesitated. Because if Lucien has gone to the observatory during a council meeting, he is searching for something specific. Unease deepened. What? Mrs. Hollowmere looked toward the snow beyond the window. The final journal. Silence filled the room. Aurielle remembered the observatory. The dust-covered desk. The forgotten records. The journals left behind by Lucien's father. She remembered something else as well. One volume had always seemed incomplete. There was another journal. Clara asked. Mrs. Hollowmere nodded slowly. A final volume disappeared after Lord Ravenshire died. Aurielle felt her pulse quicken. Disappeared? No one could find it. The housekeeper's gaze sharpened. Until this morning. The room became very still. You found it? Aurielle asked. Not exactly. Mrs. Hollowmere reached into her sleeve and removed a folded sheet of paper. It appeared old. Worn. Torn along one edge. A servant discovered this hidden inside a storage compartment behind the council chamber. Clara stepped closer. Aurielle did the same. The paper contained only a few lines written in faded black ink. Yet the handwriting looked familiar. Lord Ravenshire. Lucien's father. Aurielle recognized it immediately from the observatory journals. Mrs. Hollowmere unfolded the page completely. The final line stood alone near the bottom. If the truth ever returns to Blackmere, the missing journal must remain hidden until Lucien is prepared to doubt his own family. Silence followed. Deep and absolute. Clara stared at the paper. What does that mean? No one answered. Because the implication was obvious. The journal contained something dangerous. Dangerous enough that even Lucien's father had hidden it. Dangerous enough that it might change everything. Another knock sounded. This time the visitor did not wait. Lucien entered. His coat was still buttoned from the council meeting. Snow dusted one shoulder where he had crossed the courtyard. His expression revealed nothing. Yet the tension surrounding him filled the room immediately. Mrs. Hollowmere handed him the paper. He read it once. Then again. Aurielle watched carefully. You found another page. His voice remained calm. Too calm. Yes. Mrs. Hollomere studied him. The council is looking for the journal as well. Clara looked surprised. Why? Lucien folded the paper carefully. Because someone told them it exists. Silence. Aurielle felt cold move through her chest. Who? He met her gaze. That is what I intend to discover. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Clara frowned slightly. If the journal is so important, why hide it from your son? Lucien looked toward the faded note in his hand. The answer came quietly. Because my father believed the truth would force me to choose. Aurielle's heartbeat slowed. Then quickened again. Choose. The same word appeared repeatedly now. Choose Blackmere or Ashbourne. Choose family or truth. Choose loyalty or justice. Lucien crossed toward the window overlooking the cliffs. Snow continued falling beyond the glass. The council wants neutrality. His voice remained distant. Thoughtful. My father wanted doubt. Mrs. Hollomere folded her arms. Those are not the same thing. No. He looked back toward them. Something had changed in his expression. Determination, perhaps. Not at all. Aurielle stepped closer before she could stop herself. What are you going to do? Lucien held her gaze. Long enough that the room seemed to disappear around them. Find the journal. The answer felt inevitable. Yet there was something else beneath it. Something unspoken. Aurielle sensed it immediately. So did Mrs. Hollomere. So did Clara. The journal was no longer merely a record of the past. It had become the key to understanding whether Blackmere had protected Aurielle Ashbourne. Or betrayed her. Then a sudden realization struck Aurielle. The page said the journal should remain hidden until you were prepared to doubt your own family. Lucien's expression remained unreadable. Yes. Are you? Silence followed. Long enough to matter. Finally he looked toward the snow-covered sea. I think I already do. The word settled heavily inside the room. And somewhere within Blackmere Hall, hidden among decades of secrets, a missing journal waited to reveal why Lucien Ravenshire's father had spent his final years afraid of the truth. By late afternoon the storm had eased, but the tension inside Blackmere Hall had only grown worse. News traveled quickly through noble society. Faster than snow. Faster than reason. By the time the estate prepared for dinner, nearly every guest had heard a different version of the Ashbourne story. Some believed Aurielle Ashbourne had finally returned. Others believed she was an impostor created to seize an inheritance. A few claimed the Ravensshires had orchestrated everything from the beginning. Rumor moved through the corridors like smoke. Impossible to catch. Impossible to control. Aurielle stood alone in the east gallery watching the fading winter light spill across the cliffs. The sea below appeared restless beneath the grey sky. She understood the feeling. For the first time since arriving at Blackmere Hall, she felt trapped between two lives. Too much had changed for her to remain Aurielle Whitford. Yet the world seemed unwilling to accept Aurielle Ashbourne. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned. Clara Blackthorne stood in the doorway. They are gathering downstairs. Aurielle frowned slightly. For dinner? Clara hesitated. Not exactly. Unease returned immediately. What happened? Clara stepped farther into the gallery. Lord Pembroke requested a public discussion before the evening meal. Aurielle stared at her. A discussion. That was the word he used. The answer did not reassure either of them. Aurielle already knew what public discussions among nobles meant. Public judgment. Public scrutiny. Public pressure. She looked toward the darkening windows. And Lucien? Clara's expression became complicated. He is arguing with the council. Somehow that answer felt predictable. 30 minutes later the grand salon stood crowded once again. The room was smaller than the ballroom but no less impressive. Crystal chandeliers illuminated portraits of Raven's higher ancestors while fires burned inside 3 separate marble hearths. Nearly every guest from the winter assembly had gathered. Lord Pembroke stood near the centre of the room. The London barrister occupied a chair beside him. Several council members had also arrived. Their expression suggested they considered themselves the most important people in England. Aurielle entered with Clara beside her. Conversations immediately quieted. She felt the shift at once. The attention. The curiosity. The doubt. Some guests smiled politely. Others did not bother. One council member, a severe gentleman named Sir Alistair Morton, watched her with open skepticism. Miss Whitford. The title landed sharply. Not Aurelia. Not Ashbourne. Miss Whitford. Deliberate. Aurielle understood the message immediately. She inclined her head politely. Sir Alistair. The older man folded his hands behind his back. I appreciate your attendance. I was not aware attendance was optional. Several nearby guests exchanged glances. Sir Alistair's expression cooled. Directness. Interesting. Before the conversation could continue, another voice entered the room. I asked her to come. Lucien crossed the threshold. Silence followed instantly. The Duke's presence always altered a room. Tonight the effect seemed even stronger. His expression revealed little, but Aurielle sensed the strain beneath his composure. The council meeting had clearly accomplished nothing pleasant. Sir Alistair looked toward him. This matter concerns Blackmere. And Ashbourne. Lucien's answer came immediately. Which is why she is here. No one challenged him. Not openly. Yet the atmosphere tightened further. Lord Pembroke cleared his throat. Perhaps we should begin. Guests gradually took their seats. Aurielle remained standing near one of the windows. Lucien positioned himself several feet away. Not beside her. Not far from her. The distance felt intentional. Protective without appearing possessive. The discussion began politely enough. Questions regarding succession law. Questions regarding historical records. Questions regarding the Blackthorn documents. Yet beneath every topic lingered the same issue. Was Aurelia Ashbourne real? The conversation continued for nearly half an hour before Sir Alistair finally addressed the concern directly. There is another matter. Silence settled across the salon. Several documents now connect the Ashbourne disappearance to House Ravenshire. Every eye shifted toward Lucien. The Duke remained still. Yes. Sir Alistair seemed almost disappointed by the calm response. You acknowledge that. Facts do not become less true because they are inconvenient. A murmur moved through the room. Aurielle watched carefully. The council members had expected resistance. They had expected defensiveness. Instead, Lucien continued following the evidence wherever it led. Sir Alistair studied him for a moment. Then perhaps you will answer a simple question. Ask it. The older man turned toward the assembled guests. His voice carried clearly through the salon. Why should anyone trust an investigation led by the very family now implicated in the mystery? Silence exploded across the room. Not because the question surprised anyone. Because someone had finally spoken it aloud. Aurielle felt every gaze shifting again. Toward Lucien. Toward her. Toward the Ravenshire portraits lining the walls. Lord Pembroke frowned slightly. The barrister appeared uncomfortable. Clara looked alarmed. Only Sir Alistair seemed satisfied. Lucien remained motionless. The investigation is not led by Blackmere. Not officially. Sir Alistair smiled faintly. Yet everyone knows who influences it. Aurielle felt anger rising unexpectedly inside her chest. The accusation was directed at Lucien, yet somehow it felt personal. She had watched him search for answers. Watched him question his own assumptions. Watched him risk his reputation repeatedly. The suggestion that he manipulated the truth felt wrong. Deeply wrong. Before she realized what she was doing, she stepped forward. The movement drew immediate attention. Sir Alistair looked surprised. So did Lucien. Aurielle ignored both. "May I ask a question, sir?" The older man blinked once. "You may." Her voice remained calm. "If evidence had pointed toward House Ashbourne, would you still demand the investigation continue?" Sir Alistair frowned. "That is not relevant." "I believe it is." The room grew quieter. Aurielle continued. "If evidence pointed toward the Blackthorns, would you still demand answers?" "Of course." "Then why should House Ravenshire receive special protection from scrutiny?" Silence followed. Several guests exchanged thoughtful looks. Even Lord Pembroke seemed impressed. Sir Alistair's expression hardened. "That is not my argument." "No?" Aurielle met his gaze steadily. "Because it sounds very much like your argument." The salon became still. Completely still. She could feel her heartbeat. Could feel the risk. Yet something inside her had finally reached its limit. Too many people had discussed her life as though she were absent. Too many people had used uncertainty as an excuse to avoid uncomfortable truths. "I spent 18 years believing a lie." Her voice remained steady. "If House Ravenshire helped create that lie, then I want to know." A shocked silence followed. Lucien's attention fixed upon her immediately. Aurielle did not look away. "And if House Ravenshire did not create it," she continued, "then I want that truth as well." Lord Pembroke slowly nodded. The gesture was small but significant. Several others followed. Sir Alistair appeared increasingly frustrated. "You are missing the point." "Perhaps." Aurielle's gaze sharpened. "Or perhaps the point is that truth matters more than convenience." The words lingered in the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. Then she made a mistake. Or perhaps it was not a mistake. Perhaps it was simply honesty arriving too quickly. Her eye shifted toward Lucien. "Even if that truth hurts the people we trust." Silence. Absolute silence. The statement landed harder than she intended. Because everyone understood its meaning. Including Lucien. Something changed in his expression. Very briefly. Pain. Not dramatic. Not visible to most people. Yet Aurielle saw it. The realization struck her immediately. She had not accused House Ravenshire. She had accused him. Not directly. But publicly. The distinction hardly mattered. The room felt colder. Clara looked worried. Mrs. Holomere, standing near the doorway, closed her eyes briefly as though recognizing the damage. Lucien remained perfectly still. When he finally spoke, his voice revealed nothing. "Then we agree." Aurielle stared at him. "What?" "Truth matters more than convenience." His grey eyes held hers. Calm. Controlled. Distant now. Regardless of who it harms. The answer should have reassured her. Instead it felt like a wall rising between them. A wall she had helped build. No one spoke for several seconds. Then the salon doors opened suddenly. A footman hurried inside carrying a small leather case. Snow still clung to his coat. The room immediately sensed another interruption. Another development. Another secret. The footman crossed directly toward the London barrister. A messenger arrived from Dunmere. The salon froze. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned. The barrister accepted the case and opened it carefully. Inside rested a single folded letter. He unfolded it. Read once. Then again. His expression changed. Shock. Genuine shock. Lord Pembroke stood. "What is it?" The barrister looked up slowly. His voice sounded almost disbelieving. "The witness from Dunmere has been found." The room erupted. Questions came from every direction. Hope. Curiosity. Relief. Yet Aurielle barely heard any of it. Because across the salon, Lucien still stood exactly where she had left him. Calm. Silent. And for the first time since entering Blackmere Hall, she was no longer certain whether she had just defended the truth, or wounded the one person who had never stopped searching for it. The announcement shattered whatever remained of the evening's order. Guests who had been debating succession law only moments earlier abandoned every other conversation. The witness from Dunmere. The word spread through the salon faster than any rumor. For nearly 20 years the Ashbourne mystery had been built upon missing pieces. Now one of those pieces had suddenly reappeared. Lord Pembroke rose from his chair. "Where is he?" The London barrister looked down at the letter again. "The message does not specify." Frustration rippled through the room immediately. "Then what does it say?" Sir Alistair demanded. The barrister unfolded the paper completely. A local magistrate from Dunmere reports that an elderly man matching the witness description has been identified. Silence settled across the salon. Hope and caution struggled against one another. Lucien finally stepped forward. "Is he alive?" "Yes." Relief moved through the room. Aurielle felt it too. A witness. Someone who might finally explain why her childhood memories felt fractured. Someone who might know how a missing Ashbourne child became Aurielle Whitford. The barrister continued reading. However, the magistrate notes that the witness refuses to discuss the fire with anyone except a woman named Seraphine Vale. Silence fell so suddenly it felt physical. Every eye turned towards Seraphine. The older woman remained perfectly still near the fireplace. Only her eyes betrayed surprise. Genuine surprise. Lord Pembroke frowned. "He asked for you specifically." Seraphine accepted the attention with remarkable composure. "Apparently." Sir Alistair narrowed his eyes. "Interesting." The single word carried enough suspicion to fill the room. Aurielle felt her stomach tighten. The black gloves. The carriage. The years of secrecy. Seraphine had remained connected to every major clue. Yet none of the connections ever formed a complete picture. The older woman met Sir Alistair's gaze directly. "If you intend to accuse me of something, I recommend you become more specific." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Lucien intervened before the discussion could deteriorate further. "The witness wants Seraphine. That fact matters more than speculation." Lord Pembroke nodded reluctantly. "Agreed." The salon gradually settled. Yet the tension remained. Aurielle noticed something else as well. Lucien never looked toward her. Not once. The realization bothered her more than it should have. The discussion continued for another hour. Travel arrangements. Legal considerations. Questions regarding the witness. By the time dinner finally concluded, everyone appeared exhausted. Everyone except Seraphine. She seemed increasingly distant. Thoughtful. As though the letter had awakened memories she preferred to leave buried. Much later that evening, Aurielle found her alone in the West Library. Rain had replaced the snow. Water tapped softly against the tall windows overlooking the sea. Firelight flickered across shelves lined with centuries of books. Seraphine stood beside one of the windows staring into the darkness. She did not seem surprised when Aurielle entered. I wondered how long it would take. Aurielle stopped several feet away. "You expected me?" "Of course." Seraphine smiled faintly. "Curiosity is one of your more predictable qualities." Aurielle folded her arms. "The witness asked for you." "Apparently." "You do not seem surprised." The older woman looked back toward the rain-streaked glass. "That is because I know who he is." Silence filled the library. Aurielle stared at her. You know him? Yes. The answer came quietly, calmly, as though discussing the weather. Aurielle felt frustration rise immediately. Then why have you never mentioned him? Seraphine closed her eyes briefly. Because I believed he was dead. The honesty caught Aurielle off guard. For several moments neither spoke. Fire crackled softly in the hearth. Rain whispered against the windows. Finally Aurielle stepped closer. Who is he? Seraphine remained silent. Long enough that Aurielle almost repeated the question. Then the older woman answered. Martin Hale. The name meant nothing. Yet Seraphine spoke it with unmistakable weight. He worked for Ashbourne Manor. Aurielle asked. For nearly 40 years. A strange sadness entered Seraphine's expression. He knew every corridor. Every servant. Every family secret. Aurielle's pulse quickened. And he survived the fire. Yes. The answer barely rose above a whisper. Aurielle stared at her. Then he knows what happened. Seraphine's gaze lowered. Perhaps. You do not sound certain. The older woman laughed softly. There was no humor in the sound. Because truth and memory are not always the same thing. Aurielle wanted to argue. Instead she remained quiet. Something about Seraphine tonight felt different. Less guarded. More vulnerable. The realization unsettled her. For weeks she had viewed the older woman as a puzzle. A possible villain. A possible ally. Tonight she looked simply tired. Why would he ask for you? Aurielle asked. Seraphine turned away from the window. For the first time, genuine emotion appeared on her face. Regret. Deep regret. Because I was there. The library seemed to stop breathing. Aurielle felt every heartbeat. At Ashbourne Manor. Seraphine nodded. The night of the fire. Silence followed. Complete silence. Aurielle stared at her. Every mystery. Every clue. Every unanswered question suddenly pointed toward the woman standing only a few feet away. You were there. Yes. Why? Seraphine looked toward the fire. Because your mother invited me. Aurielle's breath caught. Her mother. Not Lady Ashbourne. Not some distant historical figure. Her mother. The word changed everything. Seraphine continued quietly. We had known one another since childhood. The confession felt almost impossible. You were friends. For many years. Aurielle struggled to reconcile the information. Nothing about the woman before her matched the image she had created. Then why keep this secret? Seraphine's expression tightened. Because some truths become heavier with time. The answer frustrated Aurielle. Yet before she could respond, Seraphine stepped toward a small writing desk near the fireplace. She opened a drawer. Reached inside. Then withdrew something wrapped in faded cloth. Aurielle watched closely. Seraphine carried the bundle to a nearby table and unfolded it carefully. Inside rested a child's silver bracelet. Tarnished by age but unmistakably elegant. Aurielle felt her pulse stop. She knew it immediately. Not from memory. From instinct. The bracelet felt familiar in a way she could not explain. Seraphine touched the metal gently. Your mother gave this to me the night before the fire. Aurielle stared at the bracelet. Why? The older woman swallowed carefully. Because she was afraid. The answer settled heavily between them. Fear again. Always fear. Fear surrounded every part of the Ashbourne story. Afraid of what? Seraphine closed her eyes. For several moments she seemed unable to speak. Then the words finally emerged. Someone inside Ashbourne Manor. Aurielle felt cold move through her chest. Not strangers. Not rivals. Someone inside the house. Someone trusted. The implication changed everything. Seraphine looked toward her. Tears glimmered briefly in her eyes before disappearing. Your mother believed someone intended to destroy the Ashbourne line. The room spun slightly. Aurielle gripped the edge of the table. Who? The question escaped as little more than a whisper. Seraphine shook her head slowly. I never learned the name. Disappointment struck immediately. Then another realization followed. But Martin Hale might know. Seraphine nodded. Yes. Silence returned. This time it felt different. Closer. More fragile. Aurielle looked at the bracelet once more. Then toward the woman who had carried it for 18 years. You cared about her. Seraphine's composure finally cracked. Only slightly. Yet enough. Very much. The answer carried more grief than Aurielle expected. For the first time she saw beyond the secrets. Beyond the manipulation. Beyond the mysteries. She saw a woman who had lost a friend and spent nearly 2 decades carrying the weight of that loss. Neither spoke for several moments. Finally Aurielle asked the question that had haunted her since arriving at Blackmere Hall. Why did you help me? Seraphine looked directly at her. Firelight reflected in her eyes. Because I promised her I would. Silence filled the library. Deep and absolute. Then another realization surfaced. One that made Aurielle's heart begin pounding all over again. You said my mother was afraid of someone inside Ashbourne Manor. Seraphine nodded. Yes. And Martin Hale survived. He did. Aurielle took a slow breath. Then if Martin Hale speaks. Seraphine's gaze sharpened immediately. She understood. They both did. For 18 years England had searched for answers. And somewhere in Dunmere, a forgotten servant might finally be carrying the name of the person who destroyed everything. The journey to Dunmere began before sunrise. Rain had ended during the night, leaving the cliffs wrapped in silver mist. Blackmere Hall stood silent beneath a pale winter sky while servants loaded trunks and supplies into waiting carriages. News of Martin Hale's discovery had transformed everything. The witness was no longer a possibility. He was real. Somewhere along the northern coast, a man who had survived the Ashbourne tragedy still lived. And according to Seraphine, he might know the truth that England had spent 18 years searching for. Aurielle stood beneath the stone archway overlooking the courtyard. Cold air carried the scent of salt from the sea. Several horses stamped impatiently against the frozen ground. Footmen moved briskly through the morning haze. The entire estate seemed awake despite the early hour. You should wear the heavier cloak. Mrs. Hollomere appeared beside her carrying a folded garment trimmed with dark blue wool. Aurielle accepted it without protest. I thought we were traveling by carriage. We are. The housekeeper adjusted the collar firmly. Winter does not care. Despite everything, Aurielle smiled. Mrs. Hollomere had become one of the few stable things in her life. The older woman noticed the smile immediately. There it is. Aurielle blinked. What? The expression you used to have before noble society discovered your existence. The comment startled a laugh from her. It faded quickly. Too much uncertainty remained. Too many unanswered questions waited in Dunmere. Mrs. Hollomere seemed to understand. Her expression softened. Whatever Martin Hale reveals, you will face it. Aurielle nodded slowly. She hoped that was true. Movement across the courtyard caught her attention. Lucian emerged from the main entrance accompanied by the London barrister and Lord Pembroke. They appeared deep in conversation. Serious conversation. The kind that never brought good news. Aurielle watched them approach. Lucian looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. The past several days had forced him to question everything he thought he knew about his family. Yet he carried himself with the same calm authority that seemed woven into his very nature. The sight of him stirred an uncomfortable mixture of emotions. Gratitude. Trust. Doubt. Regret. Especially regret. The memory of the salon remained fresh. Her public challenge. His silence afterward. Neither had addressed it. Neither had apologized. The distance remained. Small but undeniable. Lucien stopped several feet away. "We leave in 10 minutes. Aurielle nodded. "Has there been news?" "Only speculation." His answer remained professional. Controlled. Not cold. Yet not warm either. The distinction hurt more than she expected. Before the conversation could continue, another carriage rolled into the courtyard. Every head turned immediately. The vehicle bore no family crest. No identifying markings. Just weathered black paint and mud from long roads. A servant hurried forward. Moments later the door opened. A thin gentleman stepped down carefully. He appeared to be in his late 50s. Respectably dressed. Unremarkable at first glance. Yet the effect of his arrival was immediate. The London barrister stiffened. Lord Pembroke frowned. Lucien's expression darkened. "Who is that?" Aurielle asked quietly. No one answered at first. Then Lord Pembroke spoke. Edmund Vale. The name meant little to Aurielle. Yet the reaction surrounding her suggested it should not. Seraphine appeared moments later at the entrance of Blackmere Hall. The instant she saw the newcomer, all color left her face. Aurielle noticed immediately. So did everyone else. Edmund Vale removed his gloves. His movements appeared calm. Deliberate. Familiar. Like a man accustomed to entering difficult rooms. He approached the group without hesitation. "Good morning." Silence greeted him. Edmund did not seem surprised. His gaze shifted toward Seraphine. Something unreadable passed between them. History perhaps. Old wounds. Old secrets. "I expected a warmer reception," he said. Seraphine's voice arrived sharp enough to cut ice. "Then you expected too much." The courtyard grew very quiet. Aurielle looked from one face to another. The tension felt immediate. Personal. Nothing about this encounter appeared accidental. Edmund sighed softly. "I came because of Martin Hale." Every conversation stopped. Even the servants seemed to freeze. Lucien stepped forward. "Explain." Edmund met his gaze evenly. "I know who he is." Silence followed. Heavy and dangerous. Lord Pembroke folded his arms. "That is a remarkable coincidence." "Not really." Edmund's expression remained calm. "I have been searching for him as well." Aurielle felt cold settle through her chest. Another person searching. Another hidden investigation. Another layer of secrets beneath the secrets they already knew. Lucien's eyes narrowed. "Why?" Edmund looked toward the cliffs. Toward the sea. Toward memories only he seemed able to see. "Because Martin Hale knew something my family needed to bury." The words landed harder than anyone expected. Seraphine closed her eyes briefly. The reaction did not go unnoticed. Aurielle stared at her. Suddenly the pieces began shifting into new positions. Vale. Ashbourne. Ravensmire. Blackthorn. Perhaps they had all been looking in the wrong direction. Lucien's voice remained calm. What did he know? Edmund turned back toward them. For the first time uncertainty appeared in his expression. "The truth about my father." Silence. Complete silence. Aurielle felt her pulse quicken. Every clue. Every suspicion. Every rumor. They had all revolved around rival families. Hidden heirs. Inheritance claims. Yet Edmund Vale looked like a man carrying something much more personal. Shame. Regret. Fear. Your father was involved? Lord Pembroke asked. Edmund laughed softly. The sound held no humor. That depends on your definition of involved. Nobody liked that answer. Especially not Lucian. Try again. Edmund met his gaze. My father spent the final years of his life terrified that Martin Hale would speak publicly. The courtyard seemed to stop breathing. Seraphine lowered her eyes. Mrs. Holomere looked openly alarmed. The barrister removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly as though buying time to think. Lucian remained motionless. Why? Edmund's question arrived almost as a whisper. Because Martin Hale knew who ordered the destruction of the Ashbourne line. The word settled across the courtyard like falling snow. Aurielle felt every heartbeat. Every breath. Every possibility. For 18 years England had searched for a villain. A hidden enemy. A secret mastermind. And now someone was finally speaking aloud. Yet something felt wrong. Edmund did not look triumphant. He looked haunted. As though the truth carried consequences he did not want. Lucian seemed to recognize it too. Who was it? The question hung in the cold morning air. Edmund Vale looked toward Seraphine. Then toward Aurielle. Finally toward the sea beyond the cliffs. When he answered, his voice sounded tired. Very tired. Not my father. Confusion rippled immediately through the group. Edmund raised one hand before anyone could interrupt. That is what makes this difficult. Aurielle stared at him. What do you mean? He swallowed carefully. For years everyone believed the wrong enemy. Silence followed. Long enough to matter. Then Edmund reached into his coat and withdrew a folded document. The paper appeared old. Worn. Preserved with unusual care. Lucian accepted it without a word. He unfolded it slowly. Read the first lines. Then froze. Not dramatically. Not visibly to most people. But Aurielle saw it. She saw the moment something inside him shifted. The same expression she had witnessed when the Raven's higher seal appeared. When the missing journal surfaced. When certainty began unraveling. Lucian? He did not answer immediately. His eyes remained fixed on the document. The courtyard waited. Finally he looked up. The color had drained from his face. This cannot be correct. Edmund's expression held no satisfaction. Only resignation. I was afraid you would say that. Aurielle's heart pounded. What is it? Lucian looked directly at her. Then toward Seraphine. Then toward the ancient walls of Blackmere Hall rising behind them. When he finally spoke, every word felt heavier than the last. The document places a Raven's hire inside Ashbourne Manor 3 hours before the fire began. Silence exploded across the courtyard. Not because anyone believed it. Because everyone suddenly realized it might be true. And somewhere far away in Dunmere, Martin Hale was waiting with the one answer that could finally determine whether the greatest suspect in the Ashbourne mystery was not a Vale, but a Raven's hire. The road to Dunmere stretched across nearly 40 miles of frozen coastline. By midday the carriages had left Blackmere lands behind and entered the rugged northern countryside where cliffs rose sharply above the sea. Winter sunlight occasionally broke through the clouds, casting silver ribbons across the water before vanishing once more. Inside the lead carriage, silence had become its own passenger. Aurielle sat opposite Lucian. Between them rested a leather case containing the Raven's hire document Edmund Vale had delivered that morning. Neither had mentioned it since departing Blackmere Hall. Neither needed to. The paper remained present even when unseen. A Raven's hire inside Ashbourne Manor 3 hours before the fire. The implication hovered over every mile of the journey. Clara Blackthorne sat beside Aurielle, occasionally glancing toward the window. Across from her, Seraphine appeared lost in memories no one else could reach. Only the rhythmic sound of wheels against the road interrupted the stillness. Finally Clara broke the silence. What happens if Martin Hale confirms the document? The question settled heavily inside the carriage. No one answered immediately. Lucien's gaze remained fixed upon the passing coastline beyond the glass. Then we continue following the truth. Clara frowned. Even if it damages Blackmere. Lucien looked toward her. His expression remained calm. Especially then. Aurielle lowered her eyes. The answer should have reassured her. Instead, it deepened the conflict growing inside her heart. Days earlier she had questioned whether he would choose truth over family. Now he was doing exactly that. Yet somehow the distance between them remained. She remembered the look on his face in the salon after her public challenge. The brief flash of hurt he had hidden almost immediately. She had not forgotten it. Neither, she suspected, had he. By late afternoon the carriages reached Dunmere. The village appeared exactly as Aurielle remembered. Small stone cottages lined narrow roads overlooking the harbour. Fishing boats rocked gently against wooden docks. Seagulls circled overhead while smoke rose from dozens of chimneys. The sight struck her unexpectedly hard. Home. For so long she had believed this village contained her beginning. Now she knew it held answers to a much older story. News of their arrival spread quickly. Villagers emerged from shops and cottages as the procession moved toward the magistrate's residence near the harbour. Curious faces filled windows. Familiar faces. Some recognized Aurielle immediately. Their surprise only increased when they noticed the Duke of Blackmere accompanying her. The magistrate's house stood near the edge of the village overlooking the sea. A practical building constructed from grey stone. Nothing about it appeared remarkable. Yet everyone understood its importance. Martin Hale waited inside. At last. After 18 years. The group entered together. A fire burned warmly in the main sitting room. Shelves filled with legal records lined the walls. Near the window stood a man in his late 60s wearing a dark coat. The local magistrate. He greeted them respectfully before leading them farther inside. He is resting. The magistrate lowered his voice. His health is fragile. Seraphine stepped forward immediately. Will he speak? The magistrate nodded. He asked for you specifically. The older woman's composure slipped for the briefest moment. Anxiety. Hope. Fear. Then it vanished again. Thank you. The magistrate guided them through a narrow corridor toward a small private chamber overlooking the harbour. Aurielle felt her heartbeat quicken with every step. The room itself appeared simple. A narrow bed. 2 chairs. A small table. Nothing more. An elderly man sat near the window wrapped in a wool blanket. His hair had turned completely white. Deep lines marked his face. Yet his eyes remained surprisingly alert. The moment Seraphine entered, recognition filled them. Lady Seraphine. His voice sounded weak but steady. Seraphine stopped several feet away. For a long moment neither spoke. 18 years seemed to stand between them. Finally she smiled softly. Martin. The old servant's eyes glistened. I was beginning to think I would never see you again. Silence filled the room. Respectful silence. Human silence. The kind created when old wounds meet old memories. Martin's gaze shifted slowly across the group. It stopped on Aurielle. Everything else seemed to disappear. The old man stared at her. Not with curiosity. Not with uncertainty. Recognition. Pure recognition. Tears appeared instantly. My God. His voice trembled. It really is you. Aurielle felt emotion tighten her throat. She stepped closer. You know who I am? Martin laughed softly through tears. I carried you through the gardens when you were a baby. The room became very still. Seraphine lowered her eyes. Clara looked away. Even Lucien seemed affected by the simple statement. For years Aurielle had searched for proof she belonged somewhere. Now a stranger remembered holding her before she could even walk. The feeling was almost overwhelming. Martin wiped his eyes carefully. "Your mother would be so proud." The word struck harder than anything else. Aurielle swallowed. "You knew her well. Everyone loved her." The old servant smiled sadly. "Especially because she never cared about titles." Silence followed. Then Lucien stepped forward. Not aggressively. Not impatiently. Simply aware that time mattered. "Martin." The old man looked toward him. "There are questions we need answered." Martin nodded slowly. "I know." The room tightened. Years of mystery narrowed toward a single conversation. Lucien spoke carefully. "Who was inside Ashbourne Manor before the fire?" Martin closed his eyes. The effort required to revisit those memories seemed visible. When he finally opened them again, they appeared older somehow. More tired. Many people. Disappointment flickered briefly through the room. Martin continued before anyone could interrupt. Servants. Guests. Family friends. His gaze settled on Seraphine. Lady Seraphine was there. Seraphine nodded once. No surprise. No denial. Martin looked toward Edmund Vale. "Your father visited that afternoon." Edmund's expression remained unreadable. Again, no surprise. Martin continued. "And yes. A raven's hire arrived before sunset." Silence followed immediately. Aurielle felt her pulse quicken. Lucien remained perfectly still. "Who?" The question came quietly. Martin looked directly at him. For a moment the old servant seemed to study the Duke's face. Searching for something. Measuring something. Then he answered. "Your father." No one moved. No one spoke. The room felt frozen. Lucien's expression did not change. Yet Aurielle saw his hand tighten against the back of a nearby chair. Martin continued carefully. Lord Ravenshire met privately with Lord Ashbourne. Seraphine frowned. "Why?" The old servant shook his head. "I never learned." Disappointment spread through the room. Another answer that solved only part of the puzzle. Yet Martin was not finished. "What I do know is this." His voice lowered. Everyone leaned closer. When Lord Ravenshire left Ashbourne Manor, he looked frightened. Silence. Absolute silence. The statement felt impossible. Lord Ravenshire. Powerful. Respected. Feared by many. Frightened. Martin nodded as though reading their disbelief. I remember it because I had never seen that expression on his face before. Lucien stared at the floor. Deep in thought. Martin drew a slow breath. That was the last time I saw him. The room waited. Then Lucien asked the question everyone feared. Did my father cause the fire? Martin's eyes widened slightly. Genuine surprise. Then he shook his head. Once. Firmly. No. Relief swept through the room. Immediate and powerful. Yet Martin raised one hand. But he knew something. The relief vanished. What? Aurielle whispered. Martin looked toward the harbor beyond the window. Toward the darkening sea. Toward the past. He knew who was coming. No one understood. Not completely. Martin saw the confusion. The person your mother feared. He looked directly at Aurielle. The person who wanted the Ashbourne line erased. The room seemed to stop breathing. For 18 years they had searched for a name. A face. A villain. Now they stood closer than ever before. Lucien took a step forward. Who was it? Martin opened his mouth. The answer finally within reach. Then a sudden cough interrupted him. The old servant pressed a hand against his chest. The magistrate moved immediately to help. Several seconds passed. Long, painful seconds. Finally Martin recovered enough to breathe normally again. Yet exhaustion had settled visibly across his features. The magistrate looked concerned. "That is enough for today." Frustration swept through the room. The answer had been right there. Close enough to touch. Martin looked toward Aurielle one last time. Then toward Lucien. His voice emerged little more than a whisper. "The name is written down." Silence followed. Lucien frowned. "Where?" Martin closed his eyes. "The journal." Every heart in the room seemed to stop at once. The missing Ravensshire journal. The same journal Lucien's father had hidden. The same journal everyone had been searching for. Martin opened his eyes again. Weak but determined. "Find the journal." His gaze fixed upon Lucien. "And you will find the truth." Then the old servant leaned back into his chair, exhausted beyond words, while everyone in the room realized the final answer had been hiding in Blackmere all along. Darkness had already fallen by the time they left the magistrate's residence. Lamps glowed along Dunmere's harbour while waves rolled quietly against the docks. The village felt unchanged. Ordinary. Peaceful. Yet for those walking back toward the waiting carriages, everything had shifted once again. The answer had been within reach. One name. One final truth. And once more it had slipped away. Aurielle walked beside the sea without speaking. The cold air stung her cheeks. She welcomed it. The sensation helped steady her thoughts. Martin Hale had confirmed more than anyone expected. Lord Ravensshire had been at Ashbourne Manor. He had left frightened. He had known something. Yet he had not been the architect of the tragedy. That revelation should have brought relief. Instead it opened another door. Another mystery. Another question leading back toward the missing journal. Footsteps approached behind her. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. Lucien slowed beside her. For several moments neither spoke. The harbour stretched before them. Lantern light reflected across black water. Fishing boats rocked gently in their moorings. "You should be resting," he said eventually. Aurielle smiled faintly. "You should take your own advice." His expression softened slightly. The distance between them still existed. Yet it felt less certain now. Less permanent. Martin Hale had changed something. Not only in the investigation. In them. They walked a few more yards in silence. Then Aurielle stopped beside an old stone wall overlooking the harbour. Lucien paused as well. The sea wind moved through her hair. Somewhere nearby a bell sounded from one of the fishing vessels. "You were there for 14 years. Her voice broke the silence unexpectedly. Lucien looked toward her. "Where?" "Searching." She met his gaze. "Looking for answers." For a moment he seemed surprised by the question. Then he nodded. "Yes." Aurielle folded her hands together. "Why?" The answer mattered more than she wanted to admit. Martin Hale's words lingered in her mind. The years. The effort. The persistence. Few people devoted 14 years of their lives to solving another person's mystery. Lucien looked out toward the sea. His expression became distant. Reflective. "When I was 16, my father took me to Ashbourne Manor." Aurielle remained still. He had never spoken about this before. It was several months before the fire. His voice lowered. "I remember the gardens. The cliffs. The observatory." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Your father spent an hour explaining astronomical calculations that I did not understand." Aurielle laughed softly despite herself. "That sounds familiar." "It does." The smile faded. "Your mother was there as well." Silence settled between them. Aurielle listened carefully. Every word felt important. She was kind. Lucien's gaze remained fixed upon the harbor. She treated me like a person rather than a title. Something tightened inside Aurielle's chest. Martin Hale had said the same thing. Everyone loved her. Because she never cared about titles. Lucien continued. When news of the fire arrived, my father changed. The words came slowly now. Carefully. He became obsessed with the tragedy. Aurielle looked toward him. Because he felt responsible. Lucien hesitated. Perhaps. The uncertainty felt significant. Or because he knew something, she asked quietly. He met her gaze. That possibility has become difficult to ignore. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then Lucien looked away again. A year after the fire, my father brought me into the observatory. Aurielle listened. The sea wind carried the scent of salt between them. He showed me a map covered in notes. Lucien's expression darkened slightly. Names. Locations. Witnesses. Recognition struck immediately. He was investigating. Yes. Lucien nodded. At the time I thought he was searching for closure. His voice lowered further. Now I believe he was searching for the truth. The realization settled heavily between them. Aurielle understood something then. This story had not begun when she arrived at Blackmere Hall. It had begun years earlier. Long before either of them understood where it would lead. When he died, Lucien continued quietly, he left me one instruction. Aurielle's heartbeat quickened. What was it? Lucien looked directly at her. Find her. Silence followed. The words seemed to echo between them. Find her. Not solve the mystery. Not protect Blackmere. Find her. Aurielle felt emotion rise unexpectedly in her throat. He meant me. Yes. The answer came immediately. No hesitation. No doubt. Lucien looked toward the sea once more. For years I believed it was impossible. Aurielle remained silent. There were no witnesses. No records. No proof. A faint smile appeared. Sadder than before. Just a promise. The harbor lights blurred slightly through her vision. She blinked quickly. And yet you kept searching. Lucien laughed softly. Apparently. Neither spoke for a while. The silence felt different now. Not awkward. Not distant. Honest. At last Aurielle looked toward him. I was unfair to you. The confession surprised even her. Lucien turned. What? She drew a slow breath. In the salon. Understanding appeared instantly. Aurielle. No. She shook her head. Let me finish. Her voice remained steady despite the nervousness beneath it. I told myself I was defending the truth. She lowered her gaze briefly. But I was also angry. Lucien listened without interruption. Everything kept leading back to Blackmere. To your family. To secrets no one would explain. Her hands tightened together. And I forgot that you were searching for answers too. The harbor fell silent around them. Even the sea seemed quieter. Lucien looked at her for a long moment. Then he smiled. Not the polite smile of a duke. Not the controlled smile he showed society. A real one. Rare and genuine. I was angry too. Aurielle blinked. You were. Of course. The answer surprised a laugh from her. Lucien's expression softened further. You accused me publicly. I noticed. It was difficult to miss. She covered her face briefly. That is fair. The laughter faded gradually. Yet the tension between them had begun dissolving. Piece by piece. Like ice surrendering to sunlight. Lucien looked toward the harbor again. For what it is worth, you were right. Aurielle frowned. About what? Truth matters more than convenience. His voice remained quiet. Even when it hurts. The words carried weight now. Earned weight. Not theory. Experience. Aurielle nodded slowly. Then another thought surfaced. One she could no longer ignore. Martin said the name is written down. Lucien's expression sharpened immediately. The investigation returned. The mystery returned. Reality returned. Yes. Then the journal becomes everything. It does. Silence followed. The answer felt obvious. Yet another question remained. Aurielle looked toward him. Do you know where it is? Lucien hesitated. The reaction caught her attention immediately. Lucien. He stared across the harbor. Toward the dark horizon where sea met sky. Perhaps. Her pulse quickened. Perhaps. He exhaled slowly. When I was a child, there was one room inside Blackmere that my father never allowed anyone to enter. Aurielle felt the shift instantly. Instinct. Possibility. Hope. What room? Lucien's gaze returned to hers. The West Tower Archive. The words hung between them. Heavy with implication. You think the journal is there? I think my father hid something there. His voice remained calm. Yet she recognized the determination beneath it. The same determination that had carried him through 14 years of searching. Before Aurielle could respond, hurried footsteps echoed from the harbor road. Both turned. A rider approached at full speed. His horse's breath rose in white clouds against the night air. The man wore Blackmere livery. A messenger. Lucien's expression changed immediately. The rider dismounted before the horse fully stopped. Your Grace. He handed over a sealed envelope. Urgent. The seal belonged to Mrs. Holomere. Lucien broke it open instantly. He read the contents once. Then again. All warmth vanished from his face. Aurielle felt cold settle through her chest. What happened? For several seconds he did not answer. The messenger looked pale. Nervous. As though he wished he were anywhere else. Finally Lucien lowered the letter. His eyes met hers. The journal has been found. Relief rushed through her so quickly she almost laughed. Then she noticed his expression. Relief was the last thing he felt. That is good news. Lucien remained silent. The harbor wind seemed suddenly colder. Lucien. His voice arrived little more than a whisper. Several pages have been removed. The sea crashed against the rocks below. Somewhere behind them the village bells marked another hour. And standing beneath the winter sky, Aurielle realized someone had reached the journal before they did. They returned to Blackmere Hall before dawn. No one suggested resting. No one suggested waiting. The discovery of the journal had erased every other priority. 40 miles of frozen coastline disappeared beneath the carriage wheels while winter darkness slowly surrendered to morning. By the time the estate emerged through the mist-covered cliffs, every person inside the lead carriage understood the same thing. The mystery was approaching its end. Whether that ending would bring relief or devastation remained unknown. Blackmere Hall stood silent beneath a pale grey sky. Servants hurried across the courtyard carrying lanterns against the lingering darkness. Mrs. Holomere waited at the entrance. The moment Lucien stepped from the carriage, she approached. Her expression revealed exhaustion. And something else. Concern. Genuine concern. Where is it? Lucien asked. The housekeeper handed him a leather-bound volume immediately. West Tower Archive. Hidden inside a false compartment behind the observatory records. Aurielle felt her pulse quicken. After all these years. After all the searching. The journal finally rested in Lucian's hands. Mrs. Holomere lowered her voice. "I have not read it." Lucian nodded once. "Who found it?" "A maid discovered a loose panel while cleaning." Her expression darkened. Several pages had already been removed. The reminder settled heavily between them. The journal existed. Yet it was incomplete. Someone had reached it first. The group moved immediately toward the observatory. Morning light had not yet fully reached the upper tower. Shadows stretched across narrow stone corridors while old portraits watched silently from the walls. Aurielle remembered her first visit to this place. The dust-covered desks. The forgotten notes. The lingering presence of a man she had never met. Now she climbed those same stairs carrying the weight of 18 years. The observatory door opened with a soft creak. Everything appeared unchanged. Shelves lined with records. Maps scattered across tables. The large telescope aimed toward the winter sky beyond the glass dome overhead. Yet the room felt different. Charged with expectation. Lucian placed the journal carefully upon the central table. Everyone gathered around. Seraphine. Clara. Edmund Vale. Lord Pembroke. The London barrister. Mrs. Holomere. No one spoke. Lucian opened the first page. Silence filled the observatory. The handwriting was unmistakable. Lord Ravenshire. Neat. Precise. Controlled. The journal began exactly as expected. Observations. Witness interviews. Notes regarding Ashbourne. The early entries revealed nothing dramatic. Yet as the hours passed and the pages turned, a pattern emerged. Lord Ravenshire had not been investigating a fire. He had been investigating a conspiracy. Aurielle watched Lucian carefully. His father seemed to come alive through the words. Determined. Relentless. Refusing to abandon questions others considered dangerous. Here. Seraphine leaned forward suddenly. Everyone looked toward the page she indicated. A paragraph had been underlined heavily years ago. Lucian read aloud. The threat against Ashbourne did not originate outside the family. It originated within their circle of trust. Silence followed. Lord Pembroke frowned. The same conclusion Lady Ashbourne reached. Seraphine nodded slowly. Yes. More pages turned. More notes appeared. Meetings. Names. Locations. Fragments of evidence. Yet the missing pages created visible gaps. Entire sections ended abruptly. Conversations vanished midway through sentences. Someone had removed exactly the portions most likely to contain direct answers. Frustration grew steadily throughout the room. Finally Clara spoke what everyone was thinking. Who took the missing pages? No one answered. Because no one knew. Lucian continued reading. Midway through the journal another entry appeared. This one different from the others. Longer. More personal. The handwriting itself seemed less controlled. As though the writer had been shaken. Lucian read silently at first. Then stopped. The room noticed immediately. What is it? Aurielle asked. He looked up slowly. Something had changed in his expression. Not fear. Not exactly. Recognition. My father met the person responsible. Silence exploded through the observatory. Every heartbeat seemed louder. Seraphine stepped closer. When? Lucian looked back at the page. 2 days before the fire. Aurielle gripped the edge of the table. The answer had been sitting here all along. Hidden inside Blackmere. Waiting. Who was it? Edmund Vale asked quietly. Lucian turned the page. The next sheet had been torn out. Complete silence followed. No one moved. No one spoke. The missing page stared back at them like an open wound. The answer had existed. Someone had removed it. Clara lowered her head. Lord Pembroke muttered something under his breath. Even Mrs. Hollowmere looked defeated. Yet Lucian continued reading. The remaining entries grew increasingly urgent. Lord Ravensshire clearly believed danger was approaching. He referenced warnings, secret meetings, attempts to protect evidence. Then near the end of the journal, another name appeared repeatedly. Not a suspect. Not a villain. A witness. Martin Hale. The old servant had been central to everything. My father trusted him, Lucian said quietly. Completely. Seraphine nodded. That makes sense. Several more pages turned. Then they reached the final section. The last surviving entries. The room became still. Everyone sensed it. This was where the truth lived. Lucian read silently for nearly a minute. Aurielle watched his face. Watched every small shift in expression. Then suddenly he stopped. What? She whispered. Lucian looked up. His eyes found hers immediately. He found proof. The room inhaled sharply. Proof of what? Lord Pembroke asked. Lucian lowered his gaze to the journal once more. Proof that Aurelia Ashbourne survived. Silence. Complete and overwhelming silence. Aurielle felt the world disappear. The room vanished. The voices vanished. Everything vanished except those words. Proof. Not suspicion. Not hope. Proof. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Lord Ravensshire had known. All those years ago. He had known she lived. Mrs. Hollowmere covered her mouth. Clara smiled through tears of her own. Even Seraphine looked overcome. Lucian continued reading. His voice remained steady despite the emotion surrounding them. The child survived. The line survives. If these notes are ever discovered, let it be known that Aurelia Ashbourne was never lost. She was hidden. Aurielle closed her eyes briefly. Hidden. Not lost. The distinction mattered more than anyone could understand. For 18 years the world believed she had vanished. Yet somewhere, someone had always known the truth. When she opened her eyes again, Lucian was still reading. The final entry filled less than half a page. The handwriting appeared rushed. Urgent. As though time had become precious. Then came the last sentence. Lucian stopped speaking. The silence stretched. What does it say? Seraphine asked. Lucian swallowed carefully. The missing pages were copied. Hope surged through the room instantly. Lord Pembroke stepped forward. Copied? Lucian nodded. My father feared the journal would be discovered. Aurielle's heart began racing. Where did he hide the copies? Lucian turned the page. The final line waited there. Untouched. Unremoved. Preserved across 18 years. He read it aloud. The copies have been entrusted to the one person I know will never betray Aurelia Ashbourne. Silence followed. Then immediate confusion. Who? Clara asked. Who was it? Lucian stared at the page. For the first time since opening the journal, genuine shock appeared on his face. Aurielle felt cold move through her chest. Lucian. He looked up slowly. Directly toward Mrs. Hollowmere. The old housekeeper froze. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. Lucian's voice arrived little more than a whisper. My father gave the copies to you. The observatory fell completely silent as every eye turned toward the woman who had been standing beside them all along. The observatory remained silent for several seconds. Not ordinary silence. The kind of silence that follows a truth nobody expected. Every eye remained fixed on Mrs. Hollowmere. The old housekeeper stood motionless beside the table. Sunlight filtered through the glass dome overhead, illuminating dust particles suspended in the air. Outside, winter waves crashed against the cliffs below Blackmere Hall. Inside, 18 years of secrets had finally reached their final keeper. Aurielle watched the woman she had trusted from the beginning. The woman who had protected her, guided her, believed her when few others had. Yet even now Mrs. Hollowmere did not appear guilty. She appeared sad. Deeply sad. Lucien lowered the journal slowly. "You knew." His voice remained calm. Not accusing. Not angry. Simply stunned. Mrs. Hollowmere closed her eyes briefly. "Yes." The answer echoed through the observatory. Clara covered her mouth. Lord Pembroke sat down heavily in the nearest chair. Even Seraphine seemed shaken. Lucien stared at the woman who had practically raised him. "For how long?" Mrs. Hollowmere met his gaze. "Since the day your father died." Silence followed. Then Lucien asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Why did you never tell me?" The old housekeeper smiled sadly. "Because I promised him I would not." Aurielle felt emotion tighten inside her chest. Mrs. Hollowmere reached into her pocket slowly. No one moved. No one interrupted. She removed a small brass key worn smooth with age. "Your father knew someone was watching him." Her voice trembled slightly. "He believed the journal would eventually be discovered." Lucien looked at the key. "The copies?" She nodded. "Yes." Tears appeared in her eyes. "He said if the truth emerged before the right moment, it would destroy the wrong people." Seraphine lowered her gaze. She understood. They all did. Lord Ravenshire's had not been protecting power. He had been protecting lives. Mrs. Hollowmere crossed the room toward a narrow cabinet built into the stone wall beneath the observatory stairs. Few people had likely noticed it before. Fewer still would have suspected its significance. Her hands trembled as she inserted the key. The lock clicked softly. Then she opened the cabinet door. Inside rested a small wooden box wrapped in faded cloth. 18 years of secrets fit inside something no larger than a family Bible. Nobody breathed. Mrs. Hollowmere lifted the box carefully and carried it back to the table. Her eye settled briefly on Aurielle. "I have waited a very long time for this day." Aurielle felt tears threatening again. The housekeeper opened the lid. Inside lay several folded documents tied together with a blue ribbon. Time had yellowed the paper. Yet the writing remained clear. Lord Ravenshire's handwriting. The copies. The missing pages. At last. Lucien sat down slowly. The weight of the moment seemed almost too much for anyone standing nearby. He untied the ribbon. Unfolded the first page. Began reading. The observatory fell silent once more. This time the silence lasted nearly 10 minutes. Page after page revealed what the missing journal entries had hidden. Interviews. Correspondence. Witness statements. Private notes. Every piece pointed toward the same conclusion. Aurielle watched Lucien's face carefully. The emotions changed with every page. Surprise. Understanding. Relief. Grief. Then finally certainty. At last he lowered the documents. Nobody moved. Nobody dared interrupt. "Well?" Lord Pembroke asked quietly. Lucien looked around the room. His gaze settled first upon Aurielle. Then Seraphine. Then Edmund Vale. Finally everyone else. "My father identified the person responsible." The room seemed to stop breathing. 18 years of mystery balanced upon the next few words. Aurielle felt her heartbeat pounding against her ribs. Lucien continued. It was not a Ravensshire. Relief appeared immediately on several faces. Yet he was not finished. It was not a Vale. Edmund closed his eyes. A burden he had carried for years seemed to lift from his shoulders. Lucien glanced towards Seraphine. And it was not anyone Lady Seraphine protected. Tears filled the older woman's eyes instantly. Then came the final truth. Lucien looked back down at the documents. The person responsible was Lord Ashbourne's cousin, Nathaniel Ashbourne. Silence followed. Complete silence. Nobody had expected the answer. Not after years of suspicion aimed elsewhere. Not after endless accusations against rival families. Aurielle stared in disbelief. My family? Lucien nodded slowly. A distant relative. He looked toward the copied pages. A man facing financial ruin. A man excluded from succession. A man desperate to secure control of the estate. Lord Pembroke shook his head. Good God! Lucien continued. My father discovered the scheme only days before the tragedy. The room remained frozen. Every assumption had been wrong. Every suspicion misdirected. Nathaniel Ashbourne had hidden behind rivalries while others carried blame. Seraphine lowered into a chair. Relief and grief seemed to battle across her face. Your mother suspected him, she whispered toward Aurielle. She never had proof. Tears filled Aurielle's eyes. All these years. All these lives shaped by one man's greed. Yet another question remained. The most important one. Lucien turned another page. There is more. Everyone looked toward him immediately. His expression softened. My father learned that Aurelia survived before Nathaniel could locate her. Aurielle's hands trembled. Lucien continued reading. A group of loyal servants moved the child through several safe houses. Martin Hale helped organize the transfer. The Blackthorns provided temporary protection. Clara smiled through tears. Her grandfather's role had finally been vindicated. Lucien's voice grew quieter. Eventually the child was placed with a widow in Dunmere. Aurielle closed her eyes. Her adoptive mother. The woman who had given her a home. A family. A childhood. Love. The arrangement remained secret to ensure her safety. Silence followed. Beautiful silence. Healing silence. The truth finally fit together. Every missing piece had found its place. Then Lucien reached the final page. The very last document. His expression changed again. Something gentler this time. He looked directly at Aurielle. This one is addressed to you. Her breath caught. To me. He nodded. Carefully he handed over the final sheet. Aurielle accepted it with trembling fingers. The handwriting belonged to Lord Ravenshire. The man she had never met. The man who had spent years searching for her. Slowly she began reading. The words blurred almost immediately through tears. If this letter reaches Aurelia Ashbourne, then truth has finally done what time could not. It has brought you home. Home. The word alone nearly broke her. She continued reading. Your parents loved you beyond measure. They fought to protect you. Others fought to preserve their memory. Never allow inheritance to convince you that your value comes from land, titles, or wealth. Your value comes from the life you choose to build. Aurielle pressed a hand against her mouth. Around her, the room remained silent. Respectful. The letter continued. If Lucien finds you, trust him. He will place truth above comfort. He always has. Her vision blurred completely. She lowered the page slowly. Across the table, Lucien looked equally stunned. Apparently this was the first time he had seen those words as well. For several seconds neither spoke. Then something extraordinary happened. Lord Pembroke stood. The old nobleman looked around the observatory. Then toward Aurielle. Lady Aurelia Ashbourne. The title settled gently into the room. Not as a claim. Not as a question. As a truth. He bowed his head. Others followed. Clara. Edmund. The barrister. Even Seraphine. One by one. Recognition. Validation. Acceptance. After 18 years, Aurelia Ashbourne no longer needed to prove she existed. Tears slipped down her cheeks. She did not try to hide them. Across the room, Mrs. Holomere smiled through her own tears. The promise she had protected for nearly 2 decades had finally been fulfilled. Then Lucien stepped forward. The others gradually moved back, giving them space. Not because protocol required it. Because the moment belonged to them. He stopped before her. Neither spoke immediately. Words seemed unnecessary. Too small. Too inadequate. Finally Lucien smiled. The same rare smile she had come to treasure. Real. Warm. Entirely unguarded. Welcome home. The words broke the final barrier inside her heart. Aurielle laughed softly through tears. It took long enough. A faint laugh escaped him as well. Around them, sunlight poured through the observatory dome. The storm had passed. The mystery had ended. The truth had survived. And standing above the cliffs of Blackmere Hall, with the sea stretching endlessly beyond the horizon, Aurelia Ashbourne finally understood that home had never been a title or an estate. Home was the people who had spent 18 years refusing to let her disappear.